Hey there, welcome to our podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, could you please do us a solid? If you're enjoying what you hear, give us a 5-star rating and hit that subscribe button on your platform. It really helps us reach more parents, coaches, and youth in the youth athlete development scene. All right, let's get into this week's chat.
Welcome back to the Inner Athlete podcast. I have got a new face, one of our new coaches, actually. We've got Billy Zebra, a man with a very interesting surname. Very cool, to say the least. First of all, welcome to the podcast, Billy.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, pumped to be here. Been a little while coming, but we got there.
Yeah, I finally pushed him to get him onto the podcast, being the face of Swinburne and whatnot. That's another story for another day. But the reason why they're actually here today is Billy has been working alongside myself with Melbourne Swimming Club, and it's been over a year now since our partnership has been forged and been training with hundreds of athletes at this point, hundreds of swimmers, I should say, when it comes to their dry land program. And then we've seen a lot of successes, a lot of learning lessons along the way. And then we just want to share three real key insights that we've noticed from an SSC perspective and that we've noticed on a larger scale. And this is probably the big part of, we work, obviously with one-on-one in Inner Athlete, but also we work on a larger scale as well. So Billy, just give us a bit of a rundown of who you are, what you do, and then we'll get stuck into it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Strength and conditioning coach. I've been kind of in the S&C field for 5 or so years, like largely with a footy background. Jumped on board with you in Inner Athlete about a year ago now, and through that started with MSc, working with the swimmers. So yeah, been loving that. Something I hadn't had a ton of experience with before, but yeah, it's been awesome. Kind of branching out into different sports and working with some great athletes.
Yeah, and I guess specifically with swimming, it's like we noticed back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it'd be just specialization in the sport. And now that as science has really come up, strength and conditioning has become a bigger deal. So it was quite interesting. The history of strength and conditioning came all the way back to the University of Nebraska and their football program, which is I think in the 50s. And that's when they dominated football. And then a lot of schools started to implement strength and conditioning. And it's taken many generations and iterations of what strength and conditioning is in order to, I guess, improve performance as well. And then the other part that I actually find really interesting is the tracking and the testing of certain characteristics of athletes and making sure that we're using some sort of data. And then for you, Billy, yourself, you're doing an honors specifically in GPS data and tracking loads throughout a season. So it's really interesting how sports science is really playing a role in influencing strength and conditioning to change and making sure that we're peaking at the right time, but also load management from that perspective as well. So we're going to go into a bit more detail about that. And I think why this is in these 3 key areas of talking about, the challenging of, specialization, incorporating strength and plyometric training, and then also testing and tracking are really important is we need to make sure that we're not burning these kids out. And I think this is the real important thing that we're actually seeing a lot more of is we need some way to actually track and actually improve their ability to make progress. But we need to make sure that we're looking after the kid themselves and that they're actually healthy. And that's why we, participation rates in certain sports, we're seeing it skyrocket, but for some reason people just hit a wall, as in they're not making progress, they're burnt out, tired, their relationships suffer, disordered eating. There's a whole host of things that can happen if it's not done in the right way based on the individual as well. Yes, we train groups and squads, but we still treat them as individuals throughout the whole process as well. I think that's a real key thing and differentiator that I find from working with Melbourne Swimming is we do have the tools and the resources in order to make it individualized to a certain degree, but still training as a group, as a whole.
Yeah, cool. 100%. You look at those squads, they're definitely not all the one type of personality, one type of athlete in there. You've got to be willing to adjust, individualize for those guys.
Oh, 100%. And then we'll talk about, testing and tracking physical fitness characteristics in a sec. But we want to talk about the challenges of swimming specialization. So specialization by definition, and this was based on Nathan Parnham's. For those that don't know, Nathan Parnham was on a previous podcast talks about specialization in sport or early specialization in sport, where specialization is you specifically doing the sport absent of anything else in order to help supplement and improve the individual's athletic performance. Generalization would be incorporating maybe one other sport. So if it's swimming, it might be basketball or gym. Gym is a generalized way to improve strength, power, speed, coordination, motor control, flexibility, mobility. But the problem with swimming is it is a very repetitive sport in itself. You can consistently using mainly the same muscle groups, and then you can get develop imbalances, compensatory patterns as well. And I've noticed when it comes to, especially with younger kids, if they're not doing other sports on a consistent basis. So one of the sports I really like is track and field, because it teaches you explosiveness, generates stiffness, you get improved tendon and ligament strength as well, whole body coordination, and then also gymnastics as well. We've seen that a few of our swimmers actually do gymnastics, and they've actually done really well. It's like they just have a bigger engine. They just can move themselves and generate more force and more power, and how the rate of force they can create that is a lot higher compared to someone who just specializes specifically in swimming. And one of the key things is, if we're just purely focusing on the swimmer, it's like, yes, they're going to get technically sound at it, but eventually you're going to hit an eventual ceiling effect, because there's only so many characteristics that swimming is going to develop, where you can develop other characteristics outside of that. And I know, Billy, especially, you've been working with a lot of the junior swimmers. What are some of the things that you've been doing with, the state age kids, aged between 10 and 13 years old, that you've noticed that they've actually started to really improve on in the gym?
Yeah, I think a major one, like incorporating kind of like the plyometrics, bit of like low level speed training, has been a major one. Like you're saying, even at the young age that the state crew sort of are, a lot of them aren't exposed to other sports. They're literally just swimming. So they're just awareness of their body, those sort of power, explosive sort of attributes, like you're saying, hadn't been developed. So like specifically just very simple low level plyos, building those up slowly over time, just the changes in that, after working with them for near on a year now, like you'd almost think they're completely different people, like they're just like that slow building, that incorporating kind of power stuff that they haven't been exposed to before. Just massive impact.
Yeah, and I think another key thing as well is, a lot of parents are concerned about if their kid gains too much muscle mass, it's going to slow them down. Or, I know some coaches do have that fear. And a lot of the time is we're not training them like bodybuilders. This is a real clear thing we need to make, is we're not training them to become bodybuilders. Yes, they will gain a bit of muscle size, but it is usable size, because what we do is are their times dropping? Are they getting faster in the water? Are their turns more powerful? Are they underwaters? They seem more efficient. Sometimes gaining muscle mass is just a byproduct of their performance improving, and they may need that as well. We know some of our swimmers are actually quite relatively undersized for their age, and over time they've slowly gained more muscle mass, and that is actually not a bad thing. If they just gained size and then unable to really effectively utilize that size, then we know that's come at a detriment. But if it's the opposite way around, where we've seen some of our, state age and national age kids have actually, you see their shoulders are broader, they got bigger lats. We know that increasing that muscle size just a little bit more increases that force generating potential. And I think that's a key thing that we don't take into consideration, is we increase the size a little bit more, we increase from a peripheral perspective, so the muscle itself, the muscle belly is a lot larger. We generate more power, and then we incorporate that with training with intent and speed and plyometric training, power training, and then we train the nervous system specifically, and then we're going to be able to recruit those muscle fibers at a higher degree, generating more force and more power.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think, and we've seen that even in a relatively short period of time, like the effect that can have. And yeah, I know those classic fears from parents that I don't want my kid to look like a bodybuilder. It's like, I don't think that's going to happen as easily as you think it is. I think, yeah.
No, it's they don't have enough training volume under their belt, because these kids that we're working with of the Melbourne Swimming, they're doing dryland 2 to 3 times a week. That's 3 hours out a week. How many hours are they swimming? I don't know, 10, 12, 14 hours per week. It's not going to cancel out, but it's going to make them put on more muscle mass a lot harder. But the goal is not to gain muscle mass, it's to improve like their coordination, strength, power, endurance, muscular endurance, not necessarily gain size. But gaining size you cannot avoid, but it's not the primary objective. It's just like a byproduct of what we do. In that case. But if you look on the inverse side, you look at some of the kids and some of the boys, it's like, oh, well, actually look good. And then more than likely, if they look good, feel good, play good, race good. It kind of has like a downstream effect as well. So they may have more confidence in their actual body and ability. So it might be psychological in that side. Now, I want to go, you kind of alluded to it before, Billy, was incorporating plyometric and strength training as well. I think we really just kind of like mentioned that quite a bit. And we mentioned the specialization, or kind of mentioned both as well. So how do we go about incorporating plyometric and strength training into the sessions for the youngsters, but also the older athletes as well?
Yeah, I guess as in their schedule, usually we're seeing them prior to their actual swimming session, which really works well. But then within the sessions, bringing in a really well-structured warm-up, kind of getting them moving, adding like jump training plyos into the warm-up, I think has been a super effective way to kind of, get it, make the session more efficient, but also kind of get them when they're really ready to get some like really good high-level exposure to jump training before going into like their main sort of lift. I think that structure that kind of we've been rolling with MSC has been super effective, and like most of the kids for the most part have been able to like follow along, really invest in that sort of structure that we've laid out.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is because so we do like a general warm up, a dynamic warm up, and within dynamic warm up, it's between like 7 to 10 minutes long, incorporating some hops, jumps, crawls, and I think the biggest thing that we do is like I personally been doing this quite a lot with them now is varying up the plyometric component, so increasing the complexity. So it's that high level organization and coordination they have to develop as a skill. And I think that's actually really good because you're actually exposing them to different movement patterns as well. With swimming, it's constantly the same. So they have to learn, and I like that because it keeps a high level of engagement, because they don't want to
definitely.
They don't want to look silly. They don't want to look stupid if they don't do it well. And then you can kind of call them out. It's like, hey, focus on what we've got to do, nail the positions, but it also helps to create that long-term tendon stiffness as well. So one of the things with swimming is they don't really develop much stiffness at all. And stiffness is like your ability to say, for example, you step down from a bench, it's your ability to really jump back up. If with swimmers, they're very like plush, because like with swimming, right, you don't have like, it's not like skipping or running where you're bouncing. There's nothing like that. You really load up into the wall and you're trying to attack the wall. But unfortunately with swimming is because it takes away that the stretch shortening cycle for a lot of like big powerful movements that we normally do on land. We have to train that specifically, because the reason why is when we load up into the turns, we have to tuck and then we have to drive. And then if we can reduce the amount of contact time with the wall, it means we're actually going to be generating more power out of it as well. So yes, we might have someone who's relatively strong and a really good swimmer, but turns and the skill component of doing those turns efficiently can actually save you a lot of time, especially now we're in short course season at the moment. The state's literally just around the corner. Turns is where a lot of people really become inefficient, where the strokes are good, but you're spending a lot more time underwater as well. So the skills become such a big deal for short course season, and they'll have a positive transfer to long course season as well. We may not need to focus on it as much. When it comes to the strength work, and I've definitely noticed this from a strength perspective, is keeping the movements really basic. So what we tend to do is we tend to see where they're actually at. So for our state age swimmers, we actually do a lot more like positional based work as well, getting them to hold certain positions with like a split squat hold. We might end up doing like a push up hold to rotation along those lines, still exposing them to some sort of like free weights or, you know, some machines that like cable machines or something like that as well. But it's really scaling them back and making sure they're hitting these positions as well. And I think one of the biggest things that we tend to see the most is we're trying to get the state age kids to level up so they're up in par when they're ready to move up in par with the national age. And one of the key components is their ability to hinge. Now, this might sound a bit novel. Hinging pattern is like a deadlift, right? Obviously, you want to keep the spine relatively neutral, moving primarily through the hips. If you watch a lot of swimmers, well, if you watch the block starts, they tend to move a lot through the back. So if we can actually teach the swimmers to actually move better through the hips, whether it's through hip bridges, hip thrusts, RDLs, dowel hinges, whatever variation that we do with them, we actually want them to progress to be able to load up their hips specifically. The hips are one of the most powerful areas, and also helps to create integrity through that area specifically, especially if we transition to trap bar deadlifts, dumbbell RDLs, staggered stance cable or single legs cable RDLs. Make sure there's integrity throughout the system as they're performing it, and maintain and keeping the balance the whole time. That in itself is going to have a huge benefit, because a lot of kids, in the way that they actually move on the blocks, it's kind of like they're very rounded through their back and have an inability to really load up their hips, and which means they're not really loading up their legs. So if we can teach these kids how to better load up their hips and their legs, their block starts is going to start to improve even more as well.
Yeah, and it's really almost like a low-hanging fruit a little bit, like it's something they haven't been exposed to much, but once you kind of tick that off, get that develop that strength and that power through their hips, like the improvements that they see in the pool like can happen quite quickly, I feel. So definitely been with that state crew over the last year, progressing them from where they were at the start to where they are now, like you said, almost building up, ready to jump up the squads and push further into the trap bars, that like heavier deadlift and hinge patterns. It's that progress has been unreal.
Yeah, and probably the one thing I would say is like I'll say we loosely follow the long-term athlete development model. So the LTAD model is basically, I can't remember who actually created it, is based on physiological age, but also the chronological age as well. So based on how well or where they are, how old they are physiologically, also chronologically as well, but also taking into account their training age. So we might have kids that have got a gymnastics background that can actually progress quite fast through this in terms of exercise progressions, and their like speed, strength, power, and speed really does progress quite nicely. So they're on par, and then potentially may even actually accelerate their development, while some other kids may need to take a bit more time as well. But that doesn't mean it's going to be just like a flat line or a relatively straight line in terms of development. It might be quite flat initially, then it'll start to like ramp up. And this is what we've actually noticed with a lot of kids, is just like nailing the real basic positions of like, you know, maybe it's a kneeling push up to a a goblet squat. Like if you look at goblet squats, like primarily they'll move through their knees, not really loading up through the hips. So we want to make sure they're actually loading up, shifting, be able to shift their weight back, so the heels can actually stay more on the ground, and they're actually folding themselves up more like an accordion, rather than just slam their knees forward and loading up the patella tendon, and that we actually getting the legs more involved, or the hips more involved in the actual movement as well. So we've definitely seen a lot of progress in that perspective, and that for us as coaches is really just a real specific, like a very generalized routine. So if we really wanted to break it down in terms of how we structure it, it's basically number one, usually they come fresh out of the pool for our state age, our younger ones. So we usually will get into lines, and we're doing some sort of like low level dynamic movements. So it could be like, I like to start with like, either walking lunges or like some inchworm. So we're doing like some sort of crawl patterns, some mobility work. We work on like arabesques or like single leg RDLs. We might do, a foot grab with opposite arm reach, just to help provide a little bit of stretching post swim as well. And then we might do some sort of like dynamic movements like bear crawls, lateral bear crawls, crab walks, reverse crab walks, some sort of spin in there as well, duck walks. I sometimes like throwing that in there as well. So we get more comfortable. Yeah, if I can do it, they can do it. That's my my general idea. Loading them into these positions, they may not experience them all the time, but usually we're trying to improve the whole body motor coordination as well by giving them a bit of variety in terms of movement patterns. And over time, we actually see their movement patterns improve quite a lot, as long as we're providing the appropriate feedback for the individual as well. Then we're going to more dynamic work. We might go into like some sort of jumps, tuck jumps, lateral bounds, lateral jumps. Might go single leg pogos, single leg hops. What I like to do now is I like to do like a pogo to a split squat land as well. So adding some sort of like complexity and variation in their movement patterns as well. Yes, I know it's not very swim specific. That's not the point, but I'm trying to develop an athlete at the end of the day. And then we'll actually do some sort of like high velocity movements. So I might do like some power skips, and then we might end up finishing up with some sprints at the end.
Yeah, and I've run a very similar, similar kind of structure. I think like what you're saying with the like the pogo split squats, and kind of mentioned on what we were saying before, but even though it might not be the most swimming specific kind of movements, like the mental side of it, like the kind of fact that they have to kind of think a bit differently or focus more, something like they haven't been exposed to before, kind of maybe increases like the enjoyment for them as well. Like it's something more fun, something weird a little bit that they haven't done before. Like, and that's like going to be a benefit. So
yeah, and then also for us, I'm trying to improve the tissue quality and movement patterns, whilst they're like, oh, this is fun. This is like, oh shit, I actually learned something from today's session. So it's one of those things. And then I like adding in sprints, and I do it. And the reason why I like sprints at the end is because you add some sort of reactive component. So we do like prone starts. So we might do different positions actually. We might do prone starts facing away. We might do prone starts facing each other. We might do lying on their backs, head in different positions, half kneel position as well. I like varying it up, because if you break down a sprint start and a block start, there are some characteristics that you can actually take away from each other as well. And that's what I like. But also that whole body coordination, how are we actually getting into position as well to actually take off? Are we trying to create momentum or use that, what do we call that, the fall reflex? Oh, sorry, when we fall, are we trying to project out? Are we trying to quickly move ourselves, or be explosive and move with intent? That's what I like. So it's more like, as if when you swim, you want to race with intent. Obviously, when you train, you want to train with intent. So you train as you play as you train, kind of mentality. Yep. So do you need to do it for everything? No, but you need to do everything with high quality wherever you can. Cool. And then in terms of, I think from a parent's perspective, it's like, how many times a week do they need to be doing dry land? Like, look, how many times do our kids do it, Billy?
like ideally 3 at the moment. Yeah, 2 to 3. And yeah, I think personally, I think that's plenty given like kind of how we structure it and the movements that we're able to hit like throughout those 3 sessions. I think yeah, that's probably about what I'd be targeting if I was a parent.
Yeah, I think that'll be key. I think at certain times of the year, it really depends. So if we're looking at off season, we'd be looking at 3 times. And I think as in season increases, you could potentially reduce it to 2, depending on what the training volume and then obviously what the kid is actually doing as well in extracurricular activities. That's basically the general rule of thumb. Excuse me. So I think that's always probably the best tip in terms of how many times a week. 2 times, how long are the sessions for? 45 to an hour. They don't have to be much. They're just enough. And a lot of the times sometimes it can be a nice break from what they're always doing because they're not doing gym training all the time. And, when the kids come in, when we're working with them, it's for us as coaches, it's actually a really good opportunity for us to check in with them. If we know their mood is slightly off, we can actually check in with them. It's like, hey, I want you to do this instead. Or they come in and say, I'm injured, I'm sore, I can't do this. I'm like, okay, let's do this instead. So it allows them to still be able to train, considering there may be some sort of limitation as well. So it really helps to take that into consideration moving forward. But I want to go into probably the biggest point, and I think this gets downplayed a lot, or just kind of get not downplayed, but pushed to the side. It's just kind of like it's forgotten. It's like the bastard child forgotten about. Is testing and tracking physical fitness. So what I mean by that is we want to be doing some sort of testing and tracking. And I've spoken to Liam about this, and Ian, were two of the main coaches at Melbourne Swimming. We need to be tracking, and then what I mean by what we need to be tracking is we do it in 2 different ways. We do it 3 actual ways. One is the actual training program in terms of the loads. We're tracking that over a period of time. Number 2 is from a fitness testing perspective. Are we improving a specific test? So like lower body power, upper body strength, endurance, whatever the test is specifically. So for us, it's like chin-ups, vertical jump, counter movement jump, broad jumps, triple broad jumps. So that helps to see if their general athleticism is improving as well. And the third part is actually tracking physical fitness is a well-being survey. So we do this well-being survey twice a week with our older squads. They tend to have a lot more going on, or it's more intense because they might be in year 10, year 11, year 12, got exams, boyfriends, girlfriends, all that stuff, family stuff going on as well on the side. These tools are actually really important because we can actually monitor how fresh they are, how tired, fatigued they are. Can we back off training? Do we need to, maybe we need to cut the session down? Maybe we need to, are we in the middle of a taper, which we are at the moment for short course? Do we need to modify the exercises of the sessions or whatever it may be? It allows us to make these changes on the fly based on how the individual is actually responding. And we don't want to be like, oh, someone's tired and fatigued and they're cooked, and be like, nah, they shouldn't come in. It's like, no, they should still come in. They'll still be able to get some value out of it. You're already cooked, tired, and fatigued. If we add in some strength work and make it less, more than likely you're going to feel better. Get a bit of dopamine hit, but some blood flow, some mobility incorporated as well. And they're probably going to be able to have, as us as coaches, have more conversations around that. And I think that's the other part, is because of these wellness and wellbeing surveys that we do, is we can track sleep. Well, they track sleep themselves. So they record how many hours of sleep they had. They tell us how the quality of sleep, their hydration status, and holds them more accountable. So there's really a 3-pronged approach in terms of tracking the physical well-being of the individual. But then obviously you have the coach. But us as coaches, we've got close to 100 swimmers to look after. It becomes really difficult. So we need to use technology and resources from that perspective. But what have you noticed? Because this is really the first time that you've been exposed to something like this on a larger scale. What have you noticed since implementing, we use Bridge Athletic, bit of a plug for you guys, Bridge Athletic.
Yeah, there you go.
What have you noticed from using Bridge Athletic with us our national kids. I know you look after, our Wrighton location, and obviously you help me out with the Richmond. What have you noticed from your perspective as a coach?
Yeah, I think it's like you said there, it's such a big benefit. It kind of that relationship between like the sports science kind of side and S&C, like it kind of feeds both ways. Like you're saying, like we can change our stimulus, what we're trying to look for in the gym, and then see how that kind of transfers. Like, are they getting more tired because we've increased the loads and stuff? Like, okay, now do we need to back off? How's their stress and sleep and stuff? Like, it's been massive. And having come from a football background, we've used similar things in the past, and it kind of puts a little bit of I guess like responsibility back onto the like the athlete themselves. It's like, oh, I'm feeling tired, I'm not moving well in the gym. Like, okay, well, are you putting like effort into sleeping well at home? Like, you kind of, like you're saying, shows them like physical evidence of like, okay, maybe this is why you're feeling like this. If we can sort this problem out, like get your sleeping better, get your nutrition better, get your hydration better, then you're going to see those benefits in your performance in the pool and in the gym. So yeah, no, I'm massive on the that's more obviously speaking about the feedback, the survey kind of data, but then like it's a similar relationship with like the performance testing that we do as well, like having that hard evidence there to say like, okay, look, this is the program's working as we wanted, the guys are getting stronger, they're getting more explosive, or okay, maybe this athlete hasn't progressed like we want, let's go back and look what might have happened in their program that's led to that. Yeah, I'm massive on having that kind of interplay between the S&C and sports science kind of sides.
Yeah, and also it allows, like, especially you mentioned something really important. Is like, if they haven't tested really well, what has changed, and then we can potentially review between the last time they tested to where they currently are now. What are the things what are the variables that have changed? Is it, change of school? Is it, relationships, as I probably mentioned before? Your training volume has changed. Maybe we're in a peaking phase. Whatever it may be. There's so many factors, and the funny thing
Injury,
is,
maybe.
yeah, injury, illness as well is a real big one. Maybe lack of fueling as well. Like,
Yeah,
like whatever the pressures may be, these are the real key things that a lot of athletes don't take into consideration, of how much your daily life influences your ability to perform. It's paramount. It's huge. It's how much it has a huge influence. So if you're underdone in terms of feeling tired and fatigued, it's like, well, we can actually just look back the last 24, 48 hours, and then it's like, all right, what did you do? All right, terrible sleep, stressed out, I was studying for an exam or whatever it may be. So, okay, cool. So what are the key things you need to do moving forward? Hydrate, eat well, sleep. Okay, cool. How are we going to do that? So they know what to do, how they're going to do it, and they understand how important it is. And then we can start to put the emphasis on how important it is of just being able to be good at managing your own life 80% of the time. That's the general rule of thumb. You do like 80-20. The 20% is obviously, some variability and chaoticness. But if you're doing things well 80% of the time, you're going to be moving in that general direction. You're going to be responding well to your training. You're going to be able to, your loads may increase. So that's basically, it becomes a really cool learning tool for the athletes that we're working with, moving forward from that perspective. Yeah, I think we pretty much touched on everything that we needed to. And then I think from a parent's perspective and a coach's perspective, and from a coach's perspective, you need some sort of way to track this, and it needs to be consistent as well. I think that's probably the key thing. You need a system. It can be very simple. It could be like RPE survey or something like that. You do a post session, very simple. I know with a lot of coaches, they tend to check in with the athletes, but if you've got a large prop, it's so hard. To be honest, it's really difficult because you're trying to run the session and then you got to check in with an athlete and your attention is so split. So you need something that you can do pre and then also review after the actual session as well, and provide the recommendation to the coach, which we tend to do, and make suggestions to how we can actually manipulate the session or Be like, hey, they have this intended plan, but not everything goes to plan. You have to modify it based in accordance how everyone's actually responding. Excuse me. And then the other part I would say is for the parents. It's like for us as coaches, a lot of the parents actually coming up to us with more questions now. Like, my kid is this, that, and that, and that, and that. Okay, cool. Well, now we got evidence. We have data. This is not what I'm saying. This is what your child's actually saying to us based on the data. So when we talk to these parents, it's like, all right, your child is tired and fatigued. And they may see it from their perspective as a parent. It's like, they're up early training, they're tired, I have to wake them up, they don't eat as much, or they're coming back home, or when I pick them up, the food is, they're not eating much at school for certain reasons, whatever it may be. It might have low iron levels. I'm like, all right, now we can start to see the bigger picture of where they're currently at because we have more data points. And then we can potentially find out the time frame or timeline, how long this may be going on for as well. So when we have more data points that kind of like bias towards what may be the issue as well, then when we get the health practitioner involved, then the parents can be like providing more precise information, not just like guessing ad hoc and all that jazz. So then, blood tests can happen, hair follicle, whatever it may be, the testing. Then we can get a bit more general idea of what in the athlete's lifestyle may need to change moving forward as well. And as S&C coaches, we can help facilitate that, or demand to see a dietitian or the GP or whoever it may be to make those changes moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to talk in tangents, as you're probably aware.
Yeah.
Go. Yeah, I just want to quickly recap. So the key things are, number one, specialization. Specialization, yes, you need to specialize at your sport at some point. Early specialization doesn't really have much carryover benefit. If you are some of the best professionals in the world, they actually played the dual sport athletes, and they're actually really good at both sports as well. They just chose one over the other based on personal preference, or what could potentially make them more money, or what are they got more likely to be successful at, whatever it may be, right? And when it comes to specialization, is making sure that if you're, by definition, if you're continually doing only that sport specifically, not doing anything else to help potentially supplement it, like I said with swimming, maybe if you do athletics, that's actually a good way to supplement. Or if you're in the gym, making sure you're following a program that's going to actually help aid overall athleticism. And when you're overall athletic, it's going to improve your swimming performance. That's what we tend to generally see. And I want to quickly hit on a note about what's his face, Cameron McAvoy, who won gold in the 50-meter sprint. It was funny because when he was at Tokyo, I think he was destined to, not destined to win, but he was predicted to win. Ended up coming 7th in the final. Reviewed his whole training. Basically had 8 months off the sport. Got back, and then he basically, because he's an engineer, I think, he's an aerospace engineer, redid his whole training program, looked at it from a different perspective. He basically said, I've got to get more mobile, I've got to get stronger, I've got to get more powerful and develop more speed. And then what did he do? He just went double down in the 50-free, where you don't have to move, where you don't technically need to breathe at all. Like, you can literally just hold your breath for 20 seconds if we understand energy systems. And he ended up winning. And it was one of the tightest races within history. It ended up being some real true medal contenders, gold medal contenders in that race as well. So I think that actually showed that just because you're swimming more and more and more does not necessarily make you a better swimmer. But he ended up going back to the drawing board, filling in the gaps of, all right, I need to get stronger, more mobile. He ended up doing calisthenics for quite a while. I think he did rock climbing, I believe, lifting more weights, got stronger, built his engine. And because he's done kilometers and kilometers and kilometers of swimming, he started to use more sports science, refine his technique, his positioning, make it so much more precise, in conjunction, be able to generate more power and overall, which led him to the gold medal. So really use science to drive that specifically. More of the same thing is not necessarily better. It is to a point. And then the law of diminishing returns. Just because you do the same thing doesn't mean you get the same result. It potentially has a downfall effect. So you need to do something to fill in those gaps, and then identifying those gaps is a real bit of an art form to some degree, but using testing data is the real key part of that.
Yeah, and like we were saying before, like that's a really good example of that, reviewing what you've done previously, trying to like see why it didn't work, what can change, what did work as well, not just always trying to look at one way bad. And yeah, like just a perfect example of someone who's like using the data, reviewing, and like got the results from that kind of process in the end.
Yeah, it kind of like removed all the emotion and biases out of it and just saw it for what it was. Then you could say like, all right, now I can go celebrate and be emotional about it and all that jazz. It comes afterwards. The second part is incorporating plyometric and strength training. I think all youth athletes, I think this is just in general for everyone. They need to be doing some sort of plyometric training, but you need to start very low based on where your training age is as well. If we're looking at junior swimmers, more specifically, this is can be through like little like hops, hurdle hops, pogos, lateral pogos, different moving around and trying to reorganize themselves in space as well. So zigzags, you might give them a specific way they have to get around as well. This way they actually develop strong tissue structures, and especially for like lower limbs, for those who have lower limbs, they don't have the ability to generate stiffness when they kick. So it's a lot harder. So that's where plyometric training can really come into effect. Add that with some strength training, we improve that power, the kicking potential, the ability to pull themselves through the water, hold water, launch themselves off the blocks, because we're putting in generating specific movement patterns that will actually enhance their performance. So obviously on the block start, it's a hinge position, but it's very explosive. It's more like you're just lunging and jumping out. So it's teaching them to actually utilize their legs more. A lot of times we just kind of see the kids kind of just like almost like flop into the water so they can project out. And a lot of people don't realize the fastest, the swimmer is moving the fastest right at the blocks. As soon as they enter, it's a lot harder to build speed. It's it's so much harder once you're in the water. So once you're in the air, and as soon as you hit the water, you're pretty much at top speed. And the last point is testing and tracking. So testing and tracking the physical fitness of the athlete, and this can lead to asking more questions if need be, and really looking after the welfare and well-being and the long-term development of the athlete as well. And they get to learn so much more about themselves. The parents get to have a bit more information in terms of how the kid may be responding to training. Potentially we need to be backing things off. And even the coaches as well will start using this data. It's like, hey, like for some footy kids, right? The last couple of months, some kids have been playing, 3 games over 8 days. So obviously that's not ideal. We need to back off the training volume for them. So they need to do shorter sessions. And then moving forward, they can actually recover. And then by the next week, they're good to go. So it's basically looking after the welfare and the well-being of the athlete, making sure we're not overcooking them. And then if we overcook them, increases the likelihood of injury. And this is where soft tissue injuries just kind of like pop up really quickly, very easily, which our job as S&C coaches is to reduce the likelihood of that. And this is one other tool, incorporating strength training and plyometric training as well, and reducing specialization is a key way to actually reduce the likelihood of injury, increasing the likelihood of success or performance. Cool. I think I'll get my breath back on that. Is there anything else you want to add, Billy?
Yeah. No, I think we've covered it really well. I guess another thing on the testing, and this has certainly been with some of our older squads, like it can kind of be another useful tool to kind of build that culture, like a really good competitive culture in your like squads as well. I feel like we've kind of managed to, with the older crew, kind of the boys specifically, builds a bit of competitiveness, like that pushing each other in like a healthy way. It's just like one other little benefit I feel like testing can have within like that squad environment. But yeah, no, I think we've covered everything well, man.
Sure. All right. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, share, all those wonderful things. If you want to be able to work with us as well, you can contact us just through the normal socials, so the Facebook or Instagram as well. But other than that, Billy, thanks for your time. I'll see you soon. And everyone else, I'll see you on the next one.
Perfect. Thank you, man.
You have just listened to the Inner Athlete podcast. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the release of weekly episodes. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get great tips on all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.